May 22nd, 1856, Democratic Representative Preston Brooks of South Carolina brutally beat Republican Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts with a wooden cane in the middle of the Senate chamber. But why? For what reasons did largely peaceful yet bitterly passionate discourse leading up to the caning transform into violent hatred? Northerners and Southerners had been debating the issue of slavery and its territorial boundaries in Congress for generations without any bloodshed. In years past, John C. Calhoun of South Carolina had openly charged society in Massachusetts as insane, poverty-stricken, crime-infested, and entirely depraved, and abolitionists in the North had decried the Constitution as being stained with the blood of slaves. However, these insults did not lead to violence. The caning represented a departure from this. The status quo was no longer acceptable to either side. It was the climax of tensions between two men who refused to compromise in their beliefs. Senator Charles Sumner viewed slavery as the greatest injustice of his age. He valued the rule of law and equality of justice as the highest principles. In his view, the expansion of slavery threatened everything which he held dear. Sumner was not one to stand by when his beliefs were challenged. In fact, he said, "There is one thing needful in our public men, backbone." And this comprised that moral firmness without which they yield to the pressure of interests, of party, of fashion, of public opinion. Sumner refused to acquiesce to the demands of the South to preserve and expand slavery and was not quiet in his opposition. On the contrary, Representative Preston Brooks of South Carolina saw slavery as vital to the success and thriving of Southern society. Born in the Edgefield district in South Carolina, along with his cousin, Senator Andrew Butler, slavery was woven into the very fabric of their culture. Slaves were the main source of agricultural labor, and by 1850 exceeded 59% of the local population. In his view, the Southern economy would totally collapse without the structural support of slave labor. Brooks was raised under a Southern honor code inspired by the aristocratic courtly customs of the 17th and 18th centuries. The code prioritized unswerving personal devotion to kinsmen and purity of conscience. To believe in something meant the willingness to fight and die for that cause with courage.
These deeply held differences were a source of animosity between Sumner and Brooks, but Sumner's speech, The Crime Against Kansas, was the tipping point. In this speech, Sumner decried the pro-slavery forces in Kansas, causing bloodshed. Violent confrontations between John Brown, the other abolitionist, and the pro-slavery border ruffians. Among other topics, including the denunciation of the Kansas-Nebraska Act that was responsible for the violence and various proposals to create peace in Kansas and Missouri, Sumner unleashed a tirade of bitter invective against Southern Democratic Senator Stephen Douglas, and most notably, Senator Andrew Butler of South Carolina. Though Butler was not present, Sumner stated, "The senator from South Carolina has chosen a mistress to whom he has made his vows, and though ugly to others, is always lovely to him. Though polluted in sight of the world, is chaste in his sight. I mean the harlot slavery." Amongst the many other anti-slavery and anti-Southern sentiments expressed in Sumner's speech which enraged him, Representative Preston Brooks was most infuriated by Sumner's personal attacks on his cousin, Andrew Butler. Brooks felt that the honor of his cousin had been severely violated and was compelled to restore his dignity. 2 days after Sumner's speech was given, Brooks approached Sumner's desk in the Senate chamber and spoke to him. "I have read your speech with care and as much impartiality as was possible, and I feel it is my duty to tell you that you have libeled my estate and slandered my relative, who is aged and absent, and I have come to punish you for it." At that point, he struck him over and over with his thick, gutted Percher cane with a gold head. He hit him so hard the cane shattered. Others had to pull him off Sumner as he beat him into unconsciousness. The other members attempted to help, but were stopped by Edmondson and Keat, who shouted, "Let them be." Representative Murray and Senator Morgan restrained Brooks. Sumner needs stitches. By the next day, both men were heroes in their regions. Brooks ended up with a $300 fine for the assaulting of Sumner.
The caning was so bad, it took Sumner years to recover from Brooks' attack. He suffered severe head trauma and had symptoms for the rest of his life. He spent 3 years recovering before he returned to the Senate. The voters of Massachusetts still re-elected him and let his seat sit vacant as a reminder of the attack against him. After his recovery, he remained in the Senate for another 18 years. The House wanted to expel Brooks, but didn't have enough votes. He resigned and returned to South Carolina. With South Carolina's mentality of defending family honor, he was immediately reelected, but died shortly after at the age of 37. He was sent canes from all over the South to replace the one he had shattered over Sumner's head. The North was more angered over that gesture than the actual caning itself. It was 1859 when Sumner was back in the Senate. During the 1860 election, he gave the speech, "The Barbarism of Slavery." Sumner remained defiant and was not willing to compromise with the Confederacy in any way. This event was symbolic of the nation breakdown of reasonable discourse and compromise, where civil discussions and political opinions became violent. The divide between the North and the South was growing. Sumner became a hero of the North and Brooks one in the South. In the Southern newspapers, he was called a hero and received hundreds of new canes from admirers approving of the caning, and he was an honored guest at testimonial dinners. Brooks threatened Senator Wilson from Massachusetts as well after the attack on Sumner and challenged him to a duel. The Cincinnati Gazette said, "The South cannot tolerate free speech anywhere and would stifle it in Washington with the bludgeon and the Bowie knife, as they are now trying to stifle it in Kansas by massacre, rapine, and murder." There were rallies held throughout the North in support of Sumner, and over 1 million copies of Sumner's speech were handed out. A historian by the name of William G. Knapp said Brooks's assault was of critical importance in transforming the struggling Republican Party into a major political force. Ralph Waldo Emerson described the divide the incident represented. "I do not see how a barbarous community and a civilized community can constitute one state. I think we must get rid of slavery or we must get rid of freedom." In 1859, conflicts between the North and the South continued to develop, such as John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, and ultimately led to the breakout of Civil War in 1861. The cane fight ultimately showed that when people refuse to compromise and reasonably discourse amongst one another, conflict is inevitable.